You call this junk? The sound of tearing paper echoed through the garage like a gunshot. My brother, Dean, stood over my work table, smirking as he ripped my sketches in half, page after page, the designs I'd spent 2 years perfecting. Dean, stop. Please. I lunged for them, but he shoved me back. My palms scraped the concrete. You're delusional, Olivia, he sneered. You waste hours doodling nonsense instead of doing something useful. Dad's company needs real work, not your stupid ideas. He tossed the shredded pages into the trash bin, dusted his hands, and smiled. That smile, cold, smug, triumphant, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. You're jealous, I whispered, trembling. You saw the prototype. Jealous. He laughed, cruel and loud. You think anyone would steal your pathetic sketches? Get real, Liv. I'm trying to save you from embarrassing yourself. When he left, I dropped to my knees, sifting through the ripped pieces, tears blurring the lines and graphite. My dreams torn, smudged, gone. That was the night I realized something dark. Dean didn't want me to fail. He wanted to erase me. My name is Olivia Hartman, and I'm 26 years old. Until that night, I believed family meant protection. That love could excuse cruelty if it came from blood. But Dean taught me otherwise. We'd grown up in the shadow of my father's company, Hartman Dynamics, a small engineering firm that Dean had turned into his personal kingdom after Dad's health declined. Everyone adored him. Confident, charming, the golden son who could do no wrong. And me? I was the quiet one, the designer, the dreamer who didn't understand business. When our mother passed 3 years ago, Dean became unbearable. He'd call me fragile, too emotional, bad with money. He'd roll his eyes when I talked about my invention, a modular battery system for electric tools, something portable, safe, and efficient. I'd spent nights perfecting the concept, thinking one day it could power homes in remote areas. But Dean didn't see potential. He saw threat. He'd pat my shoulder like I was a child. Stick to art projects, Liv. Leave the real innovation to people who know what they're doing. And every time, I'd smile weakly, swallow my hurt, and tell myself he meant well. He didn't. The morning after he destroyed my sketches, Dean showed up with coffee and an apology that felt rehearsed. I overreacted, he said, leaning against the doorway of my workshop like nothing had happened. You know how stressed I get with the company. I didn't mean to hurt you. He handed me the cup, eyes soft, voice gentle, the practiced warmth of a man who knew how to control every conversation. It's okay, I murmured, even though my hand still shook. I hated that I wanted his approval. He smiled, that same perfect fake smile. Good. Let's just move forward. Maybe you can help with some admin work at the company. Something stable. Stable. The word made my stomach twist. It was his polite way of saying give up. When he left, I stared at the empty table, at the scraps I hadn't thrown away. My invention wasn't gone, it was just broken. Like me. That night, I stayed up rebuilding from memory. My sketches came back slowly like healing scars. I scanned them, encrypted them, and hid backups everywhere. Because I knew one thing now. If Dean could destroy them once, he would do it again. A month later, I filed for a provisional patent under my own name. It was my secret victory. Dean had no idea. To him, I was just his gullible little sister again, helping him at the office, organizing files, watching him charm clients like the world revolved around his voice. But every time I saw him smirk, I remembered the sound of paper tearing. Then one afternoon, while filing documents in his office, I saw it. A folder labeled Project Helios. Inside were diagrams, my diagrams. My design, traced, slightly altered, rebranded. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Dean's signature was at the bottom of every page. He'd stolen my invention. The room spun. I backed away from his desk, heart pounding. He must have photographed my original sketches before he destroyed them. That night, I confronted him. You stole my design. He laughed. Your design? Olivia, don't embarrass yourself. You think your little doodles could become a working prototype? I refined it. I made it viable. You stole it, I repeated, trembling. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You should thank me. Without me, no one would even know it existed. The gaslight burned bright in his smile. You want credit? Be grateful I didn't sue you for using my company's resources. For weeks, I lived like a ghost. Dean paraded his innovation to investors. Newspapers called him a genius. He even named the prototype after himself. The DH-1 Energy Core. Every headline cut like glass. Brilliant engineer revolutionizes portable power. Dean Hartman, Visionary of the Year. People called me to congratulate him. No one mentioned me. Not once. I'd walk through the company halls and hear whispers. She's jealous. She's unstable. She's lucky to have him. He'd smile at me in front of everyone, touch my shoulder, and say, Olivia's been so helpful lately. Like I was his assistant. The worst part, everyone believed him. He'd spent years shaping how people saw me. Sweet but fragile, creative but naive. I wanted to scream the truth, but I knew Dean would twist it until I looked crazy. So I smiled. I endured. And in the quiet hours of the night, I worked. While Dean celebrated his fake success, I refined my design further. Safer circuits, better output, sleeker housing. I filed the final patent under a new name. He thought he'd destroyed me. He had no idea I was just getting started. A month later, my mother called at last. Her voice was shaky. Dean told us you were threatening him, she whispered. What? I nearly dropped the phone. He said you showed up at his office screaming, that you were unstable, that he's worried about your mental health. I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to breathe. Mom, that's not true. I haven't even. She cut me off. Honey, maybe it's best to stay away for a while. He's under a lot of stress with the company, and you showing up doesn't help. Dean's masterpiece was complete. A story where he was the victim, and I was the unstable sister ruining his peace. I sat there after the call, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My own face looked unfamiliar, tired, hollow, broken. For the first time, I wondered if maybe he'd already won completely. The breaking point came at Dad's retirement party. I didn't plan to go, but something in me, pride, maybe, wanted to show them I wasn't the wreck Dean made me out to be. When I arrived, Dean was already there, charming the guests, telling stories, playing the golden sun. As I approached the table, I heard him laugh. Yeah, Liv's been having a tough time. We all try to be patient. She's creative, you know. The laughter around the table stung worse than any slap. I set my glass down too hard. Stop lying about me. The music quieted. All eyes turned. Dean raised his hands innocently. Liv, please. Not here. Let's not make another scene. Another scene. My parents stared in silent disappointment, not at him, but at me. I wanted to scream, to rip the mask off his smug face, but instead I turned and walked out. In the parking lot, tears blurred my vision, but my steps were steady. Because, for the first time in months, I wasn't trying to prove my innocence. I was planning my revenge. The night I decided I would stop being crushed under Dean's smile, I killed the lights and opened every file I'd ever saved. My studio smelled like solder and coffee. My hands trembled as I slid a thumb drive into the laptop, the one I'd hidden in the lining of an old coat after he tore the originals. The folder names I'd given myself were childish. Sparks, Heliodraphts, Notes Final. I read them like relics. Every timestamp, every revision note, every tiny annotation in the margins where I'd written, try this or reduce weight here. I made a list, not of anger, of facts, dates of sketches, proof of purchase for parts I'd ordered, screenshots of the encrypted backups I'd sent to an email account only I knew about. I found an old message from a vendor, order #H1723 shipped to Olivia Hartman, June 12, 2022. The vendor's reply was matter of fact, a small, cold drumbeat of truth. I printed everything. It felt strange and right, like putting armor on skin. I called the IP attorney I'd saved from a forum months ago, the one who answered emails at 2 a.m. He didn't scoff when I explained. He asked for dates, sources, and descriptions. He listened. That alone felt like mercy. After the call, I stood in the dark and let myself breathe. For the first time since Dean shredded those pages, I had movement in the direction I wanted. Not hysterical, not loud, calculated. He had stolen my work and built a castle on top of it. I was going to map the foundation and show everyone the cracks. Hook. Tomorrow, I met someone who'd seen Dean with my sketches. A quiet intern who had a memory, like a camera. Her name was Mara. She'd emailed me after seeing a notice about my time away from the company. She wrote trembling sentences. She'd scanned papers, she'd photocopied pages for Dean when he asked. She'd eaten lunch in a room where my designs were on the table. She wanted to help, but she was terrified. I met her at a coffee shop that smelled of espresso and life. She arrived with a paper bag and 2 hands that shook when she handed me an envelope. Inside were photocopies, not the final polished diagrams Dean showed investors, but raw sketches, the same slanted handwriting on margin notes I recognized as my own. She'd kept copies because she couldn't throw them away. I ran my fingers over the paper like a confession. Tears blurred the notes for a second, and Mara sucked in a breath like she'd been punched. "You'll need timestamps," she whispered. I kept the scanner logs. I know where they're saved on the network. We can pull metadata." I swallowed and told her exactly what I needed. Copies of the scanner logs, emails where Dean requested the Helios drafts, anyone who'd signed into the design room that week. She promised. Her fear softened into purpose. That night, while Dean posted another glowing photo from a client dinner, I filed a formal disclosure with the patent office, showing my earliest saved drafts and the vendor receipts. I sent Mara a secure link to upload the office logs. Each upload felt like a small victory. Each verified timestamp was a nail in the coffin of his lies. Hook. The next morning, Dean called me. His voice was honeyed and thin. He wanted to talk. I answered with a lawyer on speed dial. Dean's mask slipped only when the cameras were off. In public, he was noble and messianic. In private, he became a predator in a tailored suit. He called to make peace, then texted our mother to weaponize her silence. He began a smear campaign so subtle I almost missed it. Strategic mentions about Liv's fragile mental state in casual conversation. A carefully framed question to a reporter about family tension. A single whispered warning to an investor that people who jump on ideas impulsively aren't reliable partners. He was tightening the screws and smiling as if fixing a watch. At the same time, he accelerated his public rollout. The DH1 demo video was glossy and cinematic. The prototype in his hands looked like everything he'd ever wanted to be. He scheduled a keynote at a tech expo and sent out invites with his face on them. He wanted the world to see him as the creator, the savior, the man who turned broken scraps into gold. He wanted applause in the exact places I had once dreamed of standing. My inbox filled with messages. "Are you sure about this?" From colleagues were concerned, from friends I didn't recognize anymore. Dean's whisper network did its work. He was an expert at creating sympathy for himself and suspicion for everyone else. I watched his performance and felt something cold and furious bloom. Not the raw pain of before, but a clear, hard resolve. He'd show the world his prism of lies. I would bring along the light that shattered it. Hook, a reporter reached out. Not because of Dean's PR, but because an anonymous source had tipped them about conflicting patent filings. Dean stood in the doorway of my studio, arms folded, fake concern masking smug satisfaction. "You should rest, Liv." "You've been a little off lately," he said softly, as if he were soothing a child. My throat tightened. "Off." He sighed, loud enough for our mother to hear from the kitchen. "You've been emotional, snapping at everyone, losing focus." I blinked, the words hitting me harder than I expected. "Dean, you." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Don't make this worse. Mom's worried about you. Maybe you should take a break from all this invention stuff before it breaks you." The next thing I knew, Mom was standing behind him, arms crossed, eyes filled with cautious pity. "Sweetheart, your brother's right. You've been so tense lately." My chest burned. I looked between them, the liar and the believer. He was already rewriting the story, and I hadn't even had time to defend myself. I forced a nod, pretending calm while my stomach twisted. Inside, I was screaming. At the family dinner that weekend, Dean played his role perfectly, the golden son concerned about his fragile sister. "Yeah, I'm just worried," he said with a theatrical sigh, twirling his fork. "She's been working all night, barely eating. I caught her talking to herself yesterday." Everyone laughed lightly, even Dad. I felt my throat close. "That's not true," I said, too loud, too desperate. The laughter stopped. Dean lowered his eyes, acting wounded. "See, this is what I mean. You get defensive over nothing." Heat rushed to my face. I wanted to scream, to throw my glass, to shake them all awake. But instead I sat there, the unstable one, watching my brother smirk behind his lowered lashes. Later, when I passed him in the hallway, he whispered, "You make this too easy." Work became unbearable. Dean's company, my former company, had subtly poisoned the air against me. I'd walk into meetings and feel conversations die. Colleagues I'd trained stopped making eye contact. My supervisor, once my mentor, now looked at me with forced patience. "She's just passionate," Dean had told them with that gentle half-smile. "But sometimes passion crosses lines, you know." He knew exactly what he was doing, planting seeds, watching them grow into doubt. One afternoon, I overheard a co-worker whisper, "Poor Dean. It must be hard having a sister like that." That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not with tears. Quietly, like a cord snapping in the dark. I realized no one was coming to save me. When I finally confronted Dean, he laughed. "Why are you doing this to me?" I whispered. He leaned back in his chair, eyes full of false pity. "To you? Liv, I'm protecting you. You're not built for this world. You take everything too personally. Gaslight, twist, deny, repeat." "You stole my sketches," I said, voice trembling. He chuckled, low and cruel. "You really think anyone would believe that? You barely have the mental clarity to remember where you put them." My breath caught. He'd practiced that line, rehearsed it. I stood frozen, realizing this wasn't about jealousy anymore, it was about control. He didn't just want my idea. He wanted to own the story. "You can't keep this up forever," I said softly. He leaned forward, smiling. "Watch me." By the time I reached my breaking point, even my parents were suggesting therapy. "Dean's just worried about you," Mom said gently. "He told us how hard you've been working, how you've been misplacing things." My hand shook. "He lied. He took everything from me, Mom. He—" "Sweetheart," she interrupted, her voice like silk over a blade. "He said you might say that." That sentence gutted me. Dean had built a maze around me, and everyone I loved was walking its halls blindfolded. That night, I sat alone in my dark studio. Every memory, every humiliation, every cruel smirk, I replayed it all. And then, in the quiet, something shifted. I stopped crying. I opened a blank notebook, and I began to sketch again. Not the invention he stole, but something new, something better, something he could never take credit for. It wasn't revenge yet. It was survival, but it was a start. The day my mother stopped answering my calls, I knew Dean had one. I'd left her a voicemail, trembling, begging her to just listen, and got silence. Hours later, Dean sent me a single text. "She needs space from your drama, Liv. Let her rest." My drama. The man who stole everything I'd built was now painting me as a burden. I drove to my parents' house anyway. Mom opened the door, arms folded tightly across her chest. Dean stood behind her, hand on her shoulder like a saint. "Olivia," she said quietly, "maybe it's time you let go of this anger. Dean's trying to make peace." He smiled, that calm, practiced smile that made everyone think he was the reasonable one. "I just want her to heal," he said softly. I stared at him, trembling. "You want me erased?" His eyes flickered, a brief glint of truth before the mask slid back on. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." When I left, Mom didn't even hug me. Work called me in for a talk. Dean had apparently shared his concerns. That's what they called it, concerns. Not lies. Not slander. "Olivia," my supervisor said, frowning kindly, "we all care about you here, but Dean mentioned some erratic behavior, missing files, misplaced sketches. We just want to make sure you're okay." I couldn't breathe. Those sketches were mine. Liv, she interrupted gently, "you're tired. Take some time off. A few weeks, maybe." Dean was standing outside the glass wall of the office, pretending to scroll through his phone, eyes flicking up just long enough to meet mine. Victorious, taunting. When I walked out, he smirked and whispered, "Guess you finally got that vacation you wanted." I held my bag tighter. The world blurred. He wasn't just stealing my work. He was dismantling me. The company sent me home, temporarily. My parents stopped calling. Dean was everywhere, in their house, at work, on social media, posting pictures with captions like, "Family means everything." And I was the ghost no one mentioned. One night, I saw a video online, Dean giving a talk about innovation. Behind him, projected on a screen, was a sketch that looked hauntingly familiar, my sketch. My chest went cold. I pressed pause, zoomed in. My signature had been cropped out. I could almost hear his voice. "You wouldn't have made it work anyway, Liv." For hours, I sat in the dark, shaking. Not just from anger, from disbelief. He'd stolen my life's work and turned it into his redemption story. And the worst part, everyone believed him. The tip to the reporter had a face, Mara's. She'd finally summoned the courage to leave an anonymous message. And the journalist called me at noon, voice rough with excitement. He asked for documentation, for permission to run a story once the facts were verified. I gave them everything. My patent filings, dated vendor receipts, Mara's scanner logs, emails where Dean had asked for finalized Helios sketches. The reporter listened like a person who smelled a headline. He asked for interviews. I declined. I wanted the facts to speak first. Dean, hungry for attention, tried to preempt us with charm and a press statement about collaboration and family support. He posted a smiling photo with our father, a picture designed to make people believe there were no cracks. Investors, always twitchy, began to call. Some withdrew, fearful of legal exposure. One sent an ominous request for clarification on IP ownership. His board asked hard questions in a meeting I wasn't invited to. On a rainy Thursday, the patent office flagged Dean's company for preliminary review. The reporter wrote the first piece that night, citing public records and an unnamed whistleblower from within Hartman Dynamics. Comments poured in with a single refrain. What's the real story? The narrative had shifted from hero worship to suspicion. I lay awake, the storm battering the windows, and for the first time in a long while, I slept with the satisfaction of knowing I had done something true. Hook. Dean's reaction wasn't petty. He was furious, and furious men make dangerous moves. He retaliated the only way a narcissist knows how, by escalating the lie and casting himself as wounded. He called my attorney and manufactured a story, claim first, evidence never required. He hired a crisis PR firm and fed them a script. The delusional sister who resented his success. He walked into investor calls with a new line. She's unstable and maybe a liability. The message was cruel, efficient, and it worked. A cautious board member excused themselves to a rival firm. But his nastiest move was personal. He arranged a family reconciliation dinner and sent a thinly veiled invitation to everyone who mattered, a handful of major clients, our parents, a local reporter he favored. He framed it as a chance to clear the air. Mom called me, voice shaking with hope. Could I come? She said it like a test, like he had already primed her to believe he would fix everything. I almost said yes. I almost wanted to see the cracks in his mask and watch them crumble. Instead, I sat with Mara and my attorney and went through contingency plans. We rehearsed statements, mapped timelines, and prepared to present the paper trail if needed. I felt the old ache, the rawness, but it was tempered now by strategy. On the night of the dinner, Dean stood in the dining room like a king, greeting guests with that same smooth smile. He wanted a public stage to look magnanimous. He didn't know he was walking into one of mine. At the dinner, when he raised his glass to toast, I was already holding the evidence that would make his smile visible to everyone, for the first time in his life, not as truth, but as a lie. I stopped answering calls. The world had turned into noise, cruel, echoing noise. Every whisper at the grocery store felt like it was about me. Every email notification made my chest tighten. Even my parents' voices, once warm, now carried his words. Maybe you overreacted, Leah. He's your brother. You know how emotional you can be. Emotional. That word burned. He'd planted it in their heads, watered it, watched it bloom like poison ivy. For weeks I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The invention that once lit up my mind now sat crumpled in the corner, the prototype half broken, just like me. But rock bottom has a sound. It's quiet, so quiet you start hearing your own truth again. I remember sitting on the floor one night, surrounded by the wreckage of my sketches. The streetlights poured through the blinds, cutting the room into lines, like my life, divided between before and after. That's when I opened my laptop, and there, buried in an old email folder, I found the file, my design, time-stamped, registered to me. My heart didn't race. It steadied. For the first time in months, I felt something other than pain. I felt clarity. He wanted me to believe I was crazy. He wanted everyone to believe that. Fine. Let him think I was broken. Let him think he'd won. Because the best revenge is the one they never see coming. Days turned into weeks. I barely recognized the woman in the mirror anymore. Hollow eyes, chipped nails, and a quietness that wasn't peace, but numbness. But something strange happens when you've lost everything. You stop being afraid. One morning, I picked up the broken prototype from the corner. My hands shook as I turned it over, tracing the scratches, the torn wires, the burnt-out circuit. He'd laughed when he threw my sketches into the trash. He'd said, "You think you're smarter than me? You'll never make it without me, Leah." I could still hear his voice, cold, mocking, so sure of himself. That morning I said out loud, "Watch me." I began rebuilding, quietly, carefully, obsessively. I took small jobs, tutoring students in design to afford materials. I worked from my tiny apartment, soldering circuits at midnight, testing code lines before dawn. Every failure hurt, but every success felt like oxygen. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not friends. I'd learned what silence could do. In silence, no one can sabotage you. And in silence, I built version 2. But my brother, ever the narcissist, couldn't leave me alone. He sent messages dripping with fake concern. "You doing okay? Heard you're still working on that little gadget." Then came the interviews, articles praising his company's innovation. And there it was, a design, my design, rebranded, repackaged, his name stamped on top. I didn't cry this time. I smiled, because now I had something he didn't. Proof, patience, and a plan. I stopped checking his company's social media after a while. Every post used to feel like another knife, their shiny ads, his smug face, the interviews where he talked about his invention and his team. But time softens certain wounds, and sometimes it sharpens others. I started running again, early mornings before the city woke up. The air felt cold, clean, almost forgiving. The rhythm of my feet on the pavement reminded me that I still existed and that I was still capable of moving forward. I joined a small inventors forum online. I didn't use my real name, just ML, my initials reversed. People liked my posts. They asked questions. Some of them offered to collaborate. For the first time in months, I wasn't the crazy sister. I was just someone with ideas. And that's when things started to shift. One day, an investor reached out. He'd seen a small prototype demo I'd uploaded anonymously. A sleeker version of the original design, 10 times more efficient. He said it had potential. He wanted to meet. I almost said no. Fear still lived somewhere inside me, the kind of fear that whispers, "You'll mess this up again." But then I heard his voice again in my head. My brother, laughing, belittling, telling me I'd never succeed. And just like that, fear turned into focus. I walked into that meeting not as the broken sister, but as someone who'd survived hell and learned to walk through fire. They loved my work. We signed an NDA that day and I began development again, but this time with real funding, real support, and a plan to file a new, stronger patent. Meanwhile, my brother kept running his mouth online. He didn't realize that his arrogance, his need to gloat, was building my case for me. Every false claim, every public brag, every mention of his design, I screenshotted it all, quietly, patiently, like a hunter waiting for the perfect shot. When the reporter called to say the piece was live, my hands trembled in a way that felt almost holy. Mara's scanner logs were in the article. My patent filings were quoted. The story didn't scream. It laid the paper trail out like a map, step by step, dated and irrefutable. Readers could see the timestamps. They could see the vendor receipts. They could see the photocopies with my handwriting. The comments flooded in with fury and disbelief. How did he get away with this? One read, "She deserves everything." Another said, "Dean's PR team tried damage control." Cheerful statements about collaboration and shared vision. Investors began to call, not to praise, to ask questions. The board scheduled an emergency meeting. Dean texted me, short, all caps, threats thinly veiled as anger. "You'll regret this," it said. I didn't reply. I was beyond fury now. I was cold and methodical. My attorney confirmed the patent office had placed his company on hold pending discovery. The board had asked for an external audit. The investor who had courted him for months put a hold on funding until things cleared up. Dean's corner of the world was cracking. That night, I sat on my apartment floor and let the noise wash over me. The relentless ping of notifications, the rush of vindication, the memory of him tearing my papers. I let myself feel it all. The disbelief, the long years of silence, the sharp, slow bloom of triumph. Then my phone buzzed with a new alert. Dean had scheduled a press conference. He was going to address the rumors. I swallowed. He was going to try to spin the story one more time. I closed my laptop and stood. I was going to be there. Hook! I walked into that room with a folder heavier than any I'd ever carried. Evidence, legal filings, and the audio of a conversation he'd thought was private. The press room smelled of stale coffee and microphones. Dean stepped to the podium with that practice smile. Cameras found him like bees to honey. He began with a calm, polished script about integrity and family, his voice warm and steady. He repeated the phrase misunderstanding 3 times, then added with a glance toward the back, "Family matters should be handled privately." Reporters scribbled. He looked innocent. He looked, until the moment I stood. My attorney gave me a squeeze of the hand and nodded. I walked forward with my folder, my heart loud in my ears. The microphone felt alien under my fingers. I put the documents on the table and spoke like someone who'd practiced honesty until it was muscle memory. "These are timestamps of my design files," I said, voice low. "These are vendor receipts. This is a recorded message where Dean discusses using my drafts." I pressed play. His voice soft, casual, laughed about how he cleaned up Liv's little ideas and how easy it was to make them sellable. The room tilted. Cameras panned. Dean's smile flickered, then thinned. He tried to talk over it. He tried to deny. The audio kept playing, his words carving away at the mask he'd worn for years. I watched his face change, color leaving. Then a flash of panic he could not hide. The crowd murmured. Phones recorded. The narrative shifted in real time from his success to his theft. Hook! A reporter pushed a mic under his nose and asked the question he couldn't answer without lying. A question with a tape recorder capturing everything. After the press room, everything moved with terrifying speed. Investors withdrew offers. A major client suspended its contract pending a full IP review. The board convened and asked Dean to step down until the investigation concluded. He called our parents, voice frenzied, begging them to back him publicly. They attempted a defensive statement. Weak, flustered, a family trying to stitch together a version of truth that no longer fit. At home, my mother's eyes were wet when she saw me on television, standing over the podium. She couldn't meet my gaze. Dad avoided the phone. Dean hurled accusations to anyone who'd listen. Claims that I'd fabricated evidence, that I was driven by jealousy. The voice of the golden sun grew louder and angrier the more gates closed on him. It was grotesque to watch. He lashed out at people who had never hurt him, at employees, at old friends. His cruelty sharpened into something animal. Yet every time he screamed, the calls and emails showed the pattern. The legal timeline, the receipts, the scan logs. It was methodical, my quiet work made loud. People who once laughed at him now read the documents and looked away. His supporters thinned. The empire he built on charm and theft began to crumble on the foundation of facts. Hook! That night, Dean walked into the empty office to find a single envelope on his desk. Printed copies of the attorney's complaint and a formal invitation. Your deposition is scheduled. Deposition day was worse for him than any headline. Under oath, in a room far less forgiving than a PR stage, his lies fragmented. He fumbled details, dates, and names. The auditor cross-examined him with hard facts, timestamps, purchase orders, and emails that matched my handwriting to his requested changes. The more he tried to reconcile his story, the deeper he sank into contradictions. The defense attorney in our corner asked precise questions and watched as his answers unspooled. When the opposing counsel produced the scanner logs showing his sign-in the night my original sketches disappeared, he went pale. He stammered, then tried to say he'd only been reviewing ideas, that he'd refined them. But refinement does not create rewritten patents, and it does not erase vendor receipts or prior filings. Outside, the press camped like vultures. Inside, Dean grew smaller. He paced the courthouse hallway after the deposition. Hands on his face, his breath shallow. He called people he had once charmed, investors, partners, voices cracking, begging for help that wouldn't come. I sat in the back with my attorney and Mara, feeling the old ache, but it was tempered with such deep, steady satisfaction that it almost felt gentle. We had built something that now existed in the world beyond his lies. A design with a name, a patent, and a person who refused to be erased. Hook! The judge issued a preliminary ruling the next week, placing an injunction on Dean's product, and the email that followed changed everything. Hartman Dynamics board has unanimously voted to remove Dean Hartman as CEO. When the board's decision became public, I expected a brief, private collapse. What I didn't expect was the public confession. Dean's resignation letter was short and desperate. He blamed stress, miscommunication, and even me, an attempt at one last victim performance. But the pattern was clear. The press published leaked emails, his crisis calls, the investor memos. The man who'd spent years shaping a perfect image watched it disintegrate into fragments of truth. Our parents called. There was a new hardness in Mom's voice, an apology that was clumsy, earnest, and late. Dad asked to speak, haltingly, his pride cleaved by the truth. It didn't erase what they'd done, the years of blind trust, but it made them human in a way that no statement ever could. I went to the Tech Expo 6 months later, not for vengeance, but to present the product I'd been building, cleaner, safer, and fully credited. I walked on stage with Mara at my side and investors who had believed in the facts. The applause felt like a salve. I didn't gloat. I explained the work, the nights, the failures, and the people who helped me. I said something I'd never said aloud before. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. Dean's name still appeared in headlines sometimes, bitter and small. But I had homes powered by my design in 2 rural clinics, grants that supported women inventors, and a small firm where credit was non-negotiable. The revenge had not been a scream. It was a reclamation. I had been erased. Then I chose to redraw myself on my terms. And when someone asked me later if I'd wanted him ruined, I answered honestly. I wanted what I'd built recognized, I said. I wanted to keep making things that helped people. Everything else was noise. The crowd cheered, and for the first time in years,